You can die for it. An idea or the world. People have done so brilliantly, letting their small bodies be bound to the stake, creating an unforgettable fury of fire. But this morning, climbing the familiar hills in the familiar fabric of dawn, I thought of China and India and Europe, and I thought how the sun blazes for everyone just so joyfully as it rises under the lashes of my own eyes, and I thought, I am so many. What is my name? What is the name of the deep breath I would take for all of us over and over? Call it whatever you want. It is happiness. It is another one of the ways to enter fire. Look. The trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light, giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. The long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of the ponds. And every pond, no matter what its name is nameless now. Every year, everything I have ever learned in my lifetime leads back to this. The fires and the black river of loss, whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones as if your own life depended on it, and when the time comes, to let it go. To let it go. Please open your hymnal now to reading number 490, The Wild Geese. Let's read this all together in unison. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about your despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. There are some of us who want to stand out and be visible, and there are others who want to disappear, who would like to be camouflaged. A human form could be so natural, so lacking in any artifice that it just blended into the landscape like one stone in a field of boulders, or or one star, not the brightest in a whole nighttime full of stars, unremarkable, like a deer, so still and silent that it blends into the underbrush. And that seemed to be the goal for Mary Oliver. Her privacy was not just her personal preference, it was a requirement of her art. I actually wrote to Mary Oliver many, many years ago asking if there was anything she could tell me about herself, her life, if there were any printed sources I could turn to understand more about her verse. And she actually responded with a note of 2 sentences that pointed me to a review from 1990 in the Bloomsbury Review. You know, I'd wanted to find out something about where this poetry came from, how it originated. What was it in her upbringing or education or exposure to the natural world? Where did it all come from? And she was not going to answer any curious questioners like myself. She seldom gave interviews, as she noted. She said, some company once wanted to do a videotape of me at home. Walk around and follow me, and wouldn't this be fine? And I said, thank you very much, no. And they wrote to me again, urging me, suggesting that people who liked my work would want to know more about me. And I wrote back and said that if I've done my work well, I vanish completely from the scene. That's how I feel about it. I believe that it is invasive of the work when you know too much about the writer. Almost anything, she said, is too much. A response that reminds me of the words of the Tao Te Ching, that a good walker leaves no footprints. Like a finger pointing at the moon, her object was to draw our attention up there and out there, not to herself, as reserved, as a guest, as elusive as melting snow. That's how the great book describes those Chinese masters who didn't want to leave any traces of ego clinging to their trail. So although she did win a Pulitzer for her book American Primitive and an American National Book Award for new and selected poems, received many accolades and fellowships. A celebrity was not her thing. I'm trying in my poems to vanish, she said, to have the reader be the experiencer. I don't want to be there. It's not even a walk we take together. Although she was a famous walker. She spent most of her career, a lot of it living in Vermont, some of it in Provincetown, outdoors almost every day. A successful walk for her. Didn't have any particular destination, but it was one where she would find herself stopping to marvel. Once she was taking a ramble in the woods, and the muse struck, and she found herself without a pen. So she started hiding pencils in the trees. So she would never find herself in that predicament again. Mary Oliver died this past January at the age of 84. She was predeceased by her longtime life partner and literary agent, Molly Cook. But of course there are tracks and footprints of the poet in all of her work. Each one, she said, went through 50 or 60 revisions before she was finally satisfied with it, all of them polished and buffed like some lens until we could see with the same vivid clarity that she did. You don't want to hear the story of my life, and anyway, I don't want to tell it, she confides to a reader in one poem. I want to listen to the enormous waterfalls of the sun, to be drenched and bathed in this liquid brilliance that comes pouring down on every centimeter of the earth in every single moment. That's the baptism she wanted us to share. Have you ever seen anything in your life more wonderful than the way the sun, every evening, relaxed and easy, floats towards the horizon, into the clouds or hills or the rumpled sea, and is gone? How it slides again out of the blackness every morning on the other side of the world like a red flower. Every morning, the world is created. Under the orange sticks of the sun, the heaped ashes of the night turn into leaves again and fasten themselves to the high branches. The ponds appear like black cloth on which are painted islands of summer lilies. If it's your nature to be happy, you'll swim along these soft trails for hours, your imagination lighting everywhere. And if your spirit carries in it the thorn that's heavier than lead, it's all you can do to keep on trudging, there's still somewhere within you a beast shouting that the earth is exactly what it wanted. Each pond with its blazing lilies is a prayer heard and answered lavishly every morning, whether or not you've ever dared to be happy, whether or not you ever dared to pray. House of Light is the name of one of her 20 volumes, one of those published by our own Beacon Press. Light seemed to be central for her. It wasn't just a metaphor, it was this actual energy that suffuses creation, that flames out from every bit of it. She was painting with words the way Monet or Van Gogh would use pigments to give impressions as fresh and luminous as her own sensations. The poppies she sees aren't just poppies, they're orange flares. A goldfinch is a coin of reddish fire. The wind on the goldenrods makes a glittering pandemonium on the citron and butter-colored hillsides. There's a radiance in every living creature that brings an intoxication of warmth when you see even a glimmer of it. Which doesn't mean that the world that she portrays is always kind or gentle. Life has no purpose and is neither civil nor intelligent, she reflects in her poem Rain. Sudden, accidental death, often violent, is there waiting for every living being, like the mouse who becomes a red, digestible joy for the night owl, like the prowling fox who leaves nothing but a feathered scuff of fur of the snowshoe hare on the pebbles by the night creek. But this isn't ultimately a cruel universe. It has its own shining necessity. Every death forming the soil for unending life, so that on the wild, amoral, reckless mountainsides, the flowers still bloom. Every year the lilies are so perfect, I can hardly believe they're lapped light crowding the black midsummer ponds. Nobody could count them all. The muskrats swimming among the pads and grasses reach out with their muscular arms and touch only so many. They're that ripe and wild. But what in the world is perfect? I bend closer and see how this one is clearly lopsided. That one wears an orange blight, and this one is a glossy cheek half nibbled away. That one a slumped purse full of its own unstoppable decay. Still, what I want in my life is to be willing to be dazzled, to cast aside the weight of facts and maybe even float a little above this difficult world. I want to believe that I'm looking into the white fire of a great mystery. I want to believe that the imperfections are nothing, that the light is everything, that it's all more than the sum of each flawed blossom rising and fading. And I do. And we do too, through some alchemy of art. These poems are inviting us to step across our own boundaries, across the bounds of our separate selves, into that continuum where we all meet with the larger soul, the larger life that animates our world. Poetry, Wendell Berry says, is not only a technique and a medium, it's a power also, the power to apprehend the unity, the sacred tie that holds life together. According to the definition of another critic, poetry means nothing more or less than interpenetration. So in her poem, White Flowers, Oliver speaks of the porous line where my own body connects to the roots and stems and the flowers. It's to help us dance across this line between self and non-self, to see beyond duality. That's the real aim of poetry. And despite that, despite those glimpses, we remain alone. We are solitary travelers, although together, tribe, family, companions on this trail, appreciating each other, but responsible only for our own awakening. One day, you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. Though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried, but you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible, it was already late enough. And a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones, but little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. For me, your message is that not only can we be saved, we're already saved if only we had the wit and the grace to see it and realize it, but how do we realize it? How do we open our eyes? How do we take off the blinders that keep us from seeing life as it is, perfect and whole? Talent is a long patience, says Oliver, quoting Flaubert. And originality, an effort of will and intense observation. With will and effort, with patience and attention, the vision can arise. When it's over, I want to say, all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I've made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world.